Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I am, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Thanks for joining me again today. Just a reminder that the podcast is fresh 5 days a week. It's a little rough over the holidays. Might skip a day here or there, but hope you can forgive me for that. But yeah, 5 days a week, fresh new podcast, and that does include the broadcast that airs on Saturdays here on KPRC 950. Okay, let's dive right into the topic of the day for this episode of the Geek Therapy Radio podcast, and that is, of course, the Xbox Series X, the newest generation, the ninth generation of console to come from it's not technically, it's the ninth generation of video game consoles. I don't think it's Xbox's technical ninth console. But regardless, the Xbox Series X, it's been officially named. It's set to launch in 2020, likely late 2020, probably fall of 2020, to meet the holiday demand and gift buying and Christmas shopping and Hanukkah shopping, what have you. So let's just start with the name, because Microsoft can't name consoles to save their life. They just can't. Xbox Series X. So we had the Xbox, Xbox One, Xbox One S, Xbox Series X. It seems to me that there could be a better name for this. There could have been a better name for the Xbox One S, to be completely frank. If you are watching this on YouTube, if I upload this to YouTube, I want to know in the comments section your names that you think it would be better to call the Xbox Series X. So what would you have named the Xbox Series X? Maybe I'll think of some off the top of my head as we go through the podcast here, but I want to get on to some other bullet points for the 2020 release Xbox Series X from Microsoft. And let's start with the design. It kind of reminds me, first of all, it's a monolith. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, I'll have pictures of it on here. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to make the thumbnail of the podcast the Xbox Series X thumbnail. So hopefully if you're in a podcast player that gets those updated thumbnails, you'll see it there. I will include links below in the description of the podcast to articles about the Xbox Series X. I gotta keep remembering to call it that, Xbox Series X, because their names suck. But the actual design of it, I think it looks actually pretty neat. I'm predisposed to kind of minimalist design. I like my hardware, not exclusively. There are some pieces of hardware and computers and such that have wacky designs, and I'm a fan of that too. But by and large, especially for something that's going in your, let's just be honest, your home theater setup. Have you seen the concepts for the PlayStation 5 that looks like a giant V, kind of like a stealth bomber B-117 or what have you? It's kind of radical. Part of me thinks, if you listen to past podcasts, that I don't think that that's going to be the final design for the PlayStation 5. If it is, fine, so be it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. It's not going to be that big of a deal. I just kind of feel, maybe 51% leaning towards that it's not going to look like that kind of flying V design for the PlayStation 5. So the reason I feel like that is because that kind of radical design on the PlayStation side would mean it sticks out like a sore thumb in a home theater setup. That being said, that may be exactly what Sony wants in that regard. They want people to come into your living room and say, what is that thing? Oh, that's the PlayStation 5. Maybe that's what Sony's thinking. We'll see about that. But what we know now, as of yesterday, as of recording this right now, a day ago, that the Xbox Series X is a very stripped down, monolithic rectangle design. It reminds me of the old Mac Pro, the trash can Mac Pro, so to speak, except it's rectangular. It also reminds me of the new Mac Pro in that it has that kind of cheese grater grill on top. Of course, that's going to be for ventilation. Now, in its vertical orientation, One would imagine that it's because heat rises, and there's likely a fan on the top there drawing the heat up, so drawing fresh, cool air in the bottom and just bringing all that fresh, cool air past all the internals and venting it out the top. That makes total sense. Microsoft says that it will be able to orient on its side in a rectangle brick kind of configuration. That may work better with home theater setups. I know there are versions of Amazon's Echo that are kind of tall, like a Bluetooth speaker, like a big elongated Coke can, or like a tall boy beer can. So maybe if you have that on in your home theater, you might put the Xbox Series X next to it in its vertical orientation, or you might lay it down flat, kind of like a small fat sound bar. Either way, you have choices here in how you orient your Xbox Series X, and it's nice that they give us that choice, that it's not going to block airflow, although I would say, just from a pure physics standpoint, that the best airflow is going to be in its vertical orientation. But enough about how it physically looks. Let's talk about what we can see on it. While it is a very monolithic, simple design, there is obviously an optical drive bay slot on it with an eject button to the right of it or on top of it, depending on how you're orienting it. So it's not going to be pure digital. Will they release a version of the Xbox Series X that is pure digital? I would say probably. I would say very likely that they would, but at least on launch in 2020, it's going to be this all-in-one monolithic design with that optical drive bay. I would also assume that these are high-capacity Blu-ray discs up in possibly over 100 gigabytes. Whatever the actual physical storage of these discs is, it's gonna be a minimum of 100 gigabytes. Of course, you can have different variances of there. You can 50 gigabyte disc, 25 gigabyte discs, what have you, to accommodate these massive games. It is not uncommon now for games to be over 100 gigabytes in size. So I'm not going to say that I'm surprised to see an optical drive here on the Xbox Series X, but I'm also happy we're not going over to pure digital. On a kind of a separate side note, and this is something I'll bring up in the actual radio show this week, which will be podcasted too, of course. I was going to talk about the writing being on the wall for GameStop. As you know, most sales, I think at most recent count, 86% of all video game sales have been digital download, and that's projected to be 90% here in the next year. It's not a surprise to anybody that most video game sales these days are digital. But that being said, there is still a benefit to physical cartridges, physical optical discs, owning your games physically. One is that you can trade those games with your friends, but most important, without having to buy new games. Let's say, hey, you both buy the new Halo game on a disc, or one of you buys Halo, one of you buys FIFA, whatever, on a disc, and you can just trade games. You don't have to go out and spend $60 again, what have you. But most importantly, with physical media, for most people, when I go into a brick and mortar store, if I happen to be near a GameStop or I walk into Best Buy, what have you, you can usually find, especially used, let's say you can find used games, and okay, now you're limiting yourself to places like GameStop and other places like that, resale, that brick and mortar stores that offer resale and used games, you can find them cheaper. Case in point, Nintendo doesn't really offer sales on their games too often. If you want to buy Zelda right now, if you want to buy Link to the Past, or Link's Awakening, it's still going to cost, as of recording right now, $60 or so on the Nintendo eShop, or Nintendo's digital distribution on the Switch. If you go into a brick and mortar store, you might find it for $5 cheaper. If you go onto eBay, you might be able to find it cheaper than that. The point is, on the resale market of physical copies of cartridges and discs, you can find the games that you want used at a significant discount, because the retailers, Nintendo in this case, usually don't slash the prices too much or don't have sales on those games too often. So coming back around to the Xbox Series X, it's interesting to me that at least in the 9th generation of consoles, as far as Microsoft is concerned, they haven't dove fully into that digital sales realm yet. They're still holding on to the optical physical media. The other thing when you download a game is obviously you don't own the physical copy. Really, you're just buying a license to play the game. Let's say something happens to your account. Let's say something happens to your console. Let's say something bad happens to your gaming setup. If you have it all on digital, you don't have the games. So on old PlayStation 2 and what have you, if your PlayStation 2 died, you weren't tied to any sort of account really effectively. So you still had your games. So you could replace the PS2 and play all your games. Yes, you can replace an Xbox Series X if it ever crashes, and you can, log into your account again and have your games there. But there's still something to be said for having physical copies, that no matter what happens, a giant EMP blast goes off and kills every electronic device, you still have physical copies of the game. So it's interesting to see that Microsoft is keeping physical games aspect of gaming, of consoles. Why was that so hard to spit out? One side effect of this is, and this will get me onto, there were three main areas of three main bullet points that Spencer talked about when they unveiled the Xbox Series X. And those three bullet points were performance, speed, and compatibility. That would lead one to believe that naturally the Xbox Series X would heavily lean into and rely on solid-state storage architecture, which is great. Awesome. I would be absolutely perplexed if a 9th generation console still had physical magnetic optical media as its main storage, so like a 1 terabyte normal hard drive in there. So it makes total sense that it's going completely solid state now. That said, I would imagine there would be an option where if you bought a physical disc for the Series X, that you could save the entire game to the solid state drive, or that there will be an initial kind of loading of the optical disc based game onto the solid state drive for the solid state to leverage the loading. If it loads completely off of the optical disc every time, that's going to mean increased load time. So yes, I would have completely imagined they're going to use the solid state architecture to leverage loading of the game from the optical disc. But I think the first time you put the game into the system, it's going to back a lot of it up to the disc. You're not going to be able to play the game instantaneously. Possibly that first time is always going to be a little slower, but that's something that we're used to nowadays. Any game you buy, even when you download a game, you're still gonna have to actually wait for the download, wait for it to install and what have you set up. So that's nothing new. Or maybe you can play the game. Maybe it'll give you the option. You don't want to chew up all that solid state space. You want to play the game right off the optical disc. Now, I do think that when you're playing it right off the optical disc, like I mentioned before, it's going to offload some data. It's going to kind of pre-cache, read ahead a little bit and put some of that data on solid state drive, again, to leverage the speed of solid state storage. Bottom line, that optical drive being there, it's not shocking, but it's still a little bit surprising that in going into 2020, Microsoft is still anticipated a desire in a lot of gamers to have physical copies of their games. So that's a thumbs up for me to Microsoft for still using optical discs, or having the option for optical discs in 2020. Phil Spencer also showcased the fact that the Xbox Series X will have, quote, real-time rendering, and they displayed a demo of this using Halo's Master Chief, a red sports car. And with the red sports car, according to the article I'm reading, which is Ars Technica, I'll include the article below, might be an exclusive car to Forza, maybe, possibly. And they also displayed the real-time rendering with a soccer match. There's no doubt in my mind that the graphics capabilities of the Xbox Series X is going to be an upgrade over the Xbox One S. That's just always with consoles. It's a natural progression that the graphics get better. In my mind, it's never reliance on good-looking graphics isn't as important to me as just good games. And that's not a strange thing to say. I think most gamers would have that point of view, that they would rather play a game that maybe wasn't as pretty as another game, but it was a great game, because you can have really pretty games that just suck, and you can have games that aren't so graphically intensive that are great. So while, yes, of course, the graphics horsepower is going to increase with the Microsoft Series, Xbox Series X, man, I hate that name. That just makes total sense. Graphics get better with each generation. What's more important to me, let's talk about the controller for a second. The controller is modified slightly. It's still unmistakable as an Xbox controller. I think that the Xbox controller, and arguments about this can go back and forth all day long, who has the better controller, PlayStation, Xbox, what have you. I personally prefer the Xbox controller, and the Xbox Series X controller, man, I hate that. Looks like it's going to be no different in terms of comfort. If comfort is going to change, it's going to somehow get more comfortable for more people. I like the way the Xbox Series X controller looks. The D-pad is a little different. There's a few little differences in there, but I like kind of the matte black look of it. Maybe they'll offer white controllers, who knows? But I like the way that the controller looks. It looks like it's going to be very comfy, and Microsoft has a good track record of making comfy controllers. So that is all wonderful. I want to know what you think, though. So I'll start that conversation by saying this. I'm not sure how excited I am for the Xbox Series X, how excited I am to buy one. And I'll just state my case right now. It's a separate company, of course, but I've never bought a Sony PlayStation 4. I always told myself I would buy a PlayStation 4 because I wanted to play The Last Guardian on the PlayStation 4. But I don't know what happens. It's not like it's too terribly expensive now. Yes, it's around $200 or so. You can find them used and what have you. I can only speak from personal experience that I struggle to get excited about consoles now. The last new console that I bought was the Nintendo Switch. And the reason why I was excited about the Nintendo Switch was I was really into Rocket League. I'm still very much into Rocket League, and it was a portable way to play Rocket League. Yes, I have Rocket League on my gaming laptop. I have Rocket League. I have access to Rocket League basically wherever I am, but it was cool to have Rocket League on a handheld console. So that's what initially got me in the door to buy the Nintendo Switch. It just so happens that all the other games on the Nintendo Switch are great. There's a lot of great games on the Nintendo Switch. I forgive the fact that it doesn't have Netflix and it doesn't have a whole ton of streaming video content availability on there, but it doesn't care. The video games on the Switch are great, but I haven't got excited about the PlayStation 4. I'm not excited about the PlayStation 5. I'm not jumping out of my seat here for the Xbox Series X. That's just me. That has nothing to do with the fact that I think it's going to be a great console. It can be a great console. It probably will be a great console, but I'm just not excited about it personally. Well, I'll just say not excited enough to buy one at launch. I'll be real honest, a big part of that is just because I don't have that kind of expendable income just to buy every new game console when it comes out. I will say that the launch trailer, the games look amazing. Supposedly that is the real-time rendering that they're talking about. What was the real term for it? Yeah, real-time rendering. I got it right. A couple things I forgot to mention about it. Yes, it's going to be backwards compatible with all your Xbox One stuff. So your peripherals, your games, and even your game saves will carry over to the Xbox Series X. There's also on the front of it a USB port that I forgot to mention. On the bottom right of it, if it's in its vertical orientation, there is a USB port. What more can I say about that? There's a USB port on the front. So on the front, you have it's a slab. You have the Xbox logo on the top left. You have the optical disc drive slot on the bottom left, and you have the USB port on the bottom right. So yeah, what do you think? Back to that question. What do you think? Are you excited to buy an Xbox Series X when it launches for the holiday season of 2020? We don't have, that being said, we don't have an official price yet. I'm going to ballpark that this is not going to be that much different from what new consoles have launched in the past. So I think it's going to be around $300, in between $300 and $400, depending on what kind of bundles you get. Maybe a little over $400, but I think between $300 and $400, that's going to be the meat and potatoes kind of ballpark price for the Xbox Series X. I don't think it's going to be anything radically more expensive than that. It's not going to be a $600 console, $700 console. It's not going to be like the Panasonic 3DO when it first came out. It's not going to be like the PlayStation 3 when it first came out. $300 to $400, I think that's going to be the launch price in holiday season 2020. With that, that's all I got. I want to know your thoughts and opinions on the Xbox Series X below in the comments section if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're just listening to the podcast, of course, you can just email me, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. You can also go to the website, geektherapyradio.com, and there's an easy way to contact me through there. So I do read all the emails. Thank you for sending it to me, especially thank you, my international listeners and international viewers. That means the world to me, because I know when you write an email to me, you're taking time out of your day to write to me. So I very much appreciate that. Also, real quick on the YouTube channel, thank you for pushing me over 2,000 subscribers. I know it's not some huge, massive 10 million subscriber channel, and it may never be. Let's keep expectations real, but I do appreciate the 2,000 thus far, because guess what? It used to be a big fat zero. You all start somewhere, so 2,000 is a cool milestone for me. I just appreciate everyone who considers subscribing to Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube. Without my usual ending comments, we're all geeks about something, so embrace your inner geek. Be good to yourselves and others, and know that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, you are worthy of receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. I know that last part is often the hardest thing to hear. It's often the hardest thing to believe about yourself. But if we just embrace our geek thing, lean into our geek thing, I think that's a good way to serve towards the end of building up our self-respect and feeling worthy about something and feeling our self-worth. So you just chip away at it day by day. There's nothing I can say to you, there's nothing anybody can say to you that's going to cure you of your depression or cure you of your low self-esteem, but you just work on it day to day. Share your geek thing with others. Learn about other people's hobbies and passions and interests. I think that's also a good way to help people out of ruts, no matter what that rut is, just doldrums of life or severe depression. It's a geek therapy, I think, is a good way to help, just help in life in general. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Geek Therapy Radio. Take care.